actually doing this.
Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that began right when the pandemic did, and it's meant to help authors, readers, and independent bookstores. And today we have a really special event. We have Thrity Umrigar. Not only is she an extraordinary writer, and her book Honor is a Reese book club pick, but she's also like one of the dearest. She's like totally in my heart. You've never met anybody more supportive, more generous, and more extraordinary. So Thrity is the best-selling author of Bombay Time, The Space Between Us, If Today Be Sweet, The Weight of Heaven, The World We Found, The Story Hour, Everybody's Son, The Secrets Between Us. Her new novel, Honor, it couldn't be more timely. It's an Indie Next pick. Also, it's a Reese Witherspoon Book Club pick. Thrity is a distinguished university professor of English at Case Western. Keep coming. She's the winner of Cleveland Arts Prize, a Lambda Literary Award, and the Seth Rosenberg Prize. She's the recipient of the Nieman Fellowship to Harvard. Honor is extraordinary, and it's also extraordinarily important for today. It's about an Indian-American journalist, Smita, who travels back to India for a story, carrying along with her a terrible secret. She's here to investigate a horrific crime. Meena, a young, loving, wonderful Hindu woman, is brutally attacked by her community for daring to love a Muslim man. Thrity has created dual love stories here, which is amazing. There's Meena's rhapsodic open love for her husband and her child, which causes this tragic rift in her culture. But there's also a love story for Smita and her unease about the feelings she has for Mohan, a man she meets on assignment. NPR called Honor a meditation on, I'm sorry, that was my first question. So congratulations on this wonderful book, Thrity, and thank you so much for being here. I'm just sort of glowing with joy to see you.
Caroline, I have a feeling you always glow with joy. You're just one of the most loving and kindest people I have ever encountered. And I'm not just saying that. And this is a double pleasure for me. It's always nice to talk about a recent book, but to talk about it with you is just, it's joy on steroids, basically.
You're going to make me cry.
Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so NPR called Honor a meditation on dignity. I think that word dignity, as well as the word honor, are now highly charged words. Can you talk about that, please? How words that should have brought happiness now are creating tension and trauma?
Yeah. So great first question. I have to think about my answer. Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Dignity as well as honor are highly charged. How did they get that way?
I think it's like language is malleable, and people, use language to serve sometimes very noble purposes and sometimes very nefarious purposes. This whole concept of honor killing, which in part is what this book is about, to me, it's just a means of containing women, keeping them in the domestic, very narrowly contrived space. And it's usually about controlling women's bodies and women's sexuality. And when any woman sort of strays from the path, things like honor killings happen. So it's a perversion of this beautiful, beautiful word. I think it's one of the loveliest words in the English language, and dignity is a close
That's right.
second, and honestly, one of the things I wanted to do in this novel is to reclaim that word, and give it its proper meaning. And it's not just Meena and Abdul, her Muslim husband, who act honorably throughout the novel. There are other characters, smaller characters. You mentioned Mohan, for instance, Smita's father in some ways. They are all very different characters. They don't necessarily even know each other, but in their own lives, in their own ways, they conduct themselves with dignity, with honor, it can be something as simple as keeping a promise to someone.
That's right.
Even when the recipient of that promise may not necessarily be worthy of that promise. But, it's like being a person of your word, you know, these basic concepts that I think are really the glue to any functioning society. And once you lose that, things fall apart. So it was very important for me in this novel to reclaim the original meaning of the word, and to actually give it back to brave people, honorable people like Mina, like Abdul, like Mohan, to some extent, even Smita, to give it back to them so that they can embrace it for themselves.
Exactly. What I loved about both Smita and Mina is they're in opposite poles. Smita is culturally privileged and advantaged, and she's an American, where Mita is, you would say she was disadvantaged, even though she's so, so rich in love. So you said that what interested you was actually not having Smita be the savior, which I loved, but Mina and her life and her dignity and the way she loves, she becomes a teacher to Smita. I loved that. I absolutely loved that. And it's so deeply moving in the book. Did you always know that that was what was going to be in the story, or did it sort of evolve? How did that come about?
I think it was organic. I mean, to some extent, I always, if I knew it in advance, I only knew it in the context of knowing who these two women were. As you well know, you don't embark on writing a novel which is going to claim a significant portion of your
Right,
life until you know your characters really, really well. You may not always
right.
know the plot, but you have to know your characters. That's like, writing 101. And I knew who these women were. And I knew that in some paradoxical way, even though from all outward appearances, Mina would be the victim. She grows up in poverty. She's the daughter and now the sister of peasants. They're kind of eking out a living. She's basically illiterate. She has every disadvantage you can think of. She has never left the village of her birth. And Smita, of course, is this worldly cosmopolitan
Right.
journalist who lives in Brooklyn. Has avocado toast for lunch as the stereotype. Just all those things. And yet, I always knew that Smita was damaged. That there was
Yeah,
something.
it's so interesting how those layers unpeel. I don't want to give anything away. I also want to comment that a lot of times when Mina is talking about her love story with Abdul, which is so tender and so wrenching, it's written in first person, which makes it even more intimate, and it makes us a part of the love story because it's so intimate. It's like we are there. I wanted to know, was that the reason why you made this for her love story first person? Was there another reason, or did you just feel her talking to you so you had to put it down?
A little of both, but I have to say that that was a more deliberate and strategic decision, that telling of Mina's story in the first person, than pretty much any other aspect of the book. And your reasons for that intimacy that the first person
Oh,
voice gives the reader, that it draws you in, that was certainly, part of it. But I would say that might be a literary reason to use the first person.
right.
There was another more political reason, if you will, which was very early on. I realized that if I had to sum up Mina in a few words, I would say Mina is a person who has never really found her voice. Or even to double down on that,
Right.
Mina is somebody whose voice has been suppressed by.
Right. She hasn't been allowed to find her voice.
She's never been allowed to find her voice or develop her voice. And I felt like if I told her story in the omniscient third person,
That's
I
interesting.
would be doubling down or compounding that error of judgment, of that error. And I just felt that from a political point of view, it was important to me for her to speak, for her to finally speak in her own way, and tell her own story, sort of lay bare what lay in her heart directly, without me acting as a kind of filter or a middle person in this communication. So it was a combination of different reasons, but I never seriously thought of writing her sections in any other way other than how they appeared.
It's totally intimate. It's totally, totally intimate and moving. So, so much of this book is just mind-boggling because of the way women are treating and the violence, which is so difficult to understand who would do this under the name of honor. I was wondering what it was like for you to write this. Was there a time where you just felt, I cannot, I have to walk away from this?
Yeah. I've written other books where there are acts of violence committed, but they have usually been off stage, so to speak. So they are implied acts of violence, and you kind of skip over the actual scene, and then you deal with the consequences of those acts. So it's not like I have shied away from writing about difficult things, but this might be possibly the first time when I've actually sort of had to do, pardon the inexcusable pun, but like a blow by blow account of what I'm depicting. And it was difficult. It was difficult most certainly from an emotional
Oh, yeah.
point of view. You know how it is. I mean, you walk away anytime you write a sad scene or a difficult scene, you carry that weight with you for days, sometimes weeks on end. It kind of filters into your personal life, into your domestic life, all those things. But it was also difficult from a craft point of view because
Right.
while I was writing that, and these are, as you know from the book, these are public acts of violence, right? And they're mob violence usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been part of a mob. I've never been an instigator or perpetrator of violence. And thankfully, I've never been a victim of public violence in my life. So you have to use your imagination. Like, I don't know what it feels like to kick another human being, right? Nor do I know what it would feel like to have some random person on the street hit me in the face, right? I've never been in a bar fight, even. So it really, you have to go so deep because you have to feel these things in your body. You have to feel that kick, you have
Right.
to feel that
Right.
punch, or conversely, you have to feel, you know, what would your body do if it was priming itself to strike out against another human being? So, so there's all that, right? You're carrying, it's an emotional weight, but I think in some ways it's a kind of cellular, if that's the right word.
Right. I
Weight,
think that is the right word.
you know?
You grew up in India, but you were part of an educated minority. I wanted to know, like, when was the first time that you realized that there was terrible inequality in India or trouble with women, or were you sheltered from that?
No, I mean, I'm sure every adult in my life tried to shelter me from it. But I have said this half jokingly in the past that the bane of my life of my childhood was this excruciating awareness of the poverty around me. It didn't affect us directly, but unlike the United States, where even today, it's possible to live in exclusive neighborhoods where it's not in your face.
Right.
It might be 3 miles down the road from you, but you can avoid those 3 miles and you never have to go through those neighborhoods. Unlike that, in India, you can be a multimillionaire, which we most certainly were not, but you could be. And, you could come down, a skyscraper in a gilded elevator and cross your marble lobby, and the instant you step out, there might be a family of four living under a tarp across the street on the sidewalk. So it's in your face. I think I think what was difficult in my own childhood was whatever those filters are that most middle class people develop at a very young age
That's right.
do not have their hearts be broken repeatedly by the gross inequity that you see around you. Whatever those filters were or are, they didn't make their way to me. So I was consumed throughout my childhood by this issue. I remember, Caroline, I used to lay in bed like as a, I don't know, 6 year old, 7 year old, and like imagine a ship. I would imagine the biggest ship that I could, and I would imagine that it was pouring rain outside, and we would gather up every homeless person, because when you're 7, you think the homeless people in
Right.
a whole city, in a mega city, can be sheltered in one ship. And, we just bundle them up and give them blankets and give them hot meals. And we'd all be sitting together, and it'd be so, I think I was probably playing Yellow Submarine too often or something, and that infiltrated. But I used to have these obsessive visions of like how to solve these problems. And whatever the adults said, which is again another middle class way of dealing with this, the poor shall always be with you, or, a version of that would be, oh, these people, even if you offered them a job, they don't really want to work. They're lazy, basically blaming the poor for their own poverty.
Right.
It never made sense to me. I just knew, the way young people instinctively know these things, that it was a lie, you know. And yeah, so that really influenced me and affected me a lot. And no amount of protection or sheltering could mitigate that.
Do you think it's possible to love a country when you're ashamed of its politics and practices?
Well, we're finding that out, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We are. We in America are, it's a very strange thing because I grew up, loving my country and fighting for women's rights and thinking things are going to be different, and now we're entering Handmaid's Tale territory, which, as Margaret Atwood said, nothing in that book has
Exactly.
not already happened.
Exactly.
Has not already happened.
Right.
So I guess the next question is, do you have any sense of what we can do beside coming out in droves to vote and speaking up? I mean, how do you change? I mean, just from reading Honor, there was no way you were going to change these people's minds who were burning people and beating people and stoning people. They just felt they were right. And as I was reading, what was so terrifying is I knew there was no way you were going to change their minds. You weren't even going to change the community's mind, because a lot of the community who liked Mina and her family still were drawn into this and said, well, we're a community, we have to take action. What do we do?
I would, this might surprise you, but in some ways I feel more comfortable talking about this issue in the American context, because this is where I grew up. I mean, this is where I've spent my entire adult life. I left England when I was 21, but for all practical purposes, I was still, I was barely out of my teens when I left. So I don't have much experience with how one goes about changing things there. But I think we have seen in recent history, and when I say recent, I mean the last, second half of the 20th century, that people's movements, whether it's the women's movement or the civil rights movement or the gay rights movement, they have resulted in change. I mean, I don't know how much down in the weeds we need to get in this now.
Right.
There were other circumstances, also favorable circumstances, that allowed these movements. But I think of the student protests against Vietnam.
Right. That's right. That had real ramifications.
Yes, and it brought about the end of the war. I don't necessarily know that war would have wound down when it did. I don't think there were economic reasons. It was just the political pressure of young people being out on the streets and literally dying for the cause that brought about that change. So, unfortunately, it's exhausting. Every
It
time
is exhausting and terrifying.
you think you put something to bed and you can move on, because God knows there are more immediate and perhaps existential crises that we need to be focusing on, like climate change.
Climate change.
We
Yeah.
can't, because we just get sucked back into fighting the wars of 50 years ago.
That's right.
So be it. I mean, I think, the only solution, I mean, there's no prophet, there's no God in heaven that's going to come floating down to help us. All we have is our own bodies. And I'm sorry to say this, but a tweet on Twitter is not going to bring about social change. No matter.
No, it won't. We have the bodies have to do it.
Yeah, we
I
just have to.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
At one point, Smita says it's a privilege for her to tell other people's stories, which I loved. And then Mohan says to her, "But who do you tell your stories to?" And when I read that, it sparked me. I would love for you to talk about that. Why is it so important not just to tell other people's stories, but to tell our own personal stories and make them known?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not as brave as you are. I mean, I've read some of your amazing essays.
Thank you.
You are not afraid of being vulnerable. It's just who you are. I'm not built the same way. I'm I find myself shying away from really telling personal stories about my own life. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not sure that I can actually change in my old age and suddenly become a different kind of a person. It is much easier for me to tell other people's stories than, at least in public forums, to tell my own. Having said that, one of the things that I found myself saying on a Zoom thing just a few weeks ago was to be vulnerable and say that a few years ago, I honestly thought that my writing career was pretty much over. And if not over, it was certainly winding down. And that too, I mean, that doesn't sound like some grand private disclosure,
For a
but
writer, it is. For a
but
writer, it is.
but we don't usually talk about how
Right.
even those of us like you and I who've been lucky and been successful to some extent, and you much more than I have, but
No, you much more than I have.
we have we've been lucky enough to find publishers who have published not just one or two, but several of our books.
Right.
And from the
Right.
outside looking in, I'm sure that sounds like, wow, you've made it. You don't ever have to sweat, you know, placing your next book. And
Right.
you know that
Right.
true. So even those small movements towards telling the truth and explaining to people, whether they are, aspiring writers or just the general public, it's tougher than that. It's not that easy. I think these things matter.
Exactly. I want to tell everybody out there, if you have questions for Thrity, please put them in the chat. It's really fun. At one point in the novel, Mohan says the important things in life are supposed to scare you. And I love that because to me, it's all about, you know what, what's worth it, and what you learn by facing things that scare you. So I want to know, like, why did you put that in? And what scares you besides career issues, which scare every writer?
Yeah, everyone. Um, I think I'm a klutz. My self-image of myself is a klutz, is that of a klutz. So every time I try and assemble something, or stick figure diagram and put something together, I think those kinds of things, I don't know if scare, but they intimidate me a little bit. And what I've realized is it's a skill like everything else. The more you persist, the more you try and do it, the easier these things get. I mean, I think what usually scares people is just fear of the unknown and the lack of effort. And as I get older, I'm beginning to realize that the only true solution to all these fears is doing,
It's doing it.
just doing
Exactly.
it. I mean, once you do it, you get over the hump pretty more often than not.
I want to talk about, your fear about career, because this amazing book, Honor, became a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and it's getting like accolades everywhere. Everybody loves it. It's highly praised. It's an important book. How mind-boggling was that to you, that you can go from one point in your career to thinking my career is finished, to getting this huge, huge attention?
It was much welcomed. It was much needed, and I'm thrilled and frankly just humbled by all of that. Um, I had nothing to do with Reese picking the book. I suspect it was the wonderful team that we both share, you and I, at Algonquin, that somehow brought the book to her attention. I mean, I
Amazing.
think that's what happened. I'm not quite sure of how she discovered the book, but I'm sure they had something to do with it. And I'll never forget the day that my editor, Kathy, you know, told me to get on a Zoom call, and there were these, I think, 6 smiling faces from
Oh, that's so great. I didn't know that
the
story.
to break the news. And this was several months, of course, before the announcement.
Wow.
And you know, I certainly remember my surprise and my delight in that moment. But what I'll never forget is the looks on all their faces, because this was a reward for all their hard work
Right.
also,
Right.
right? So and that that sense of being a team, that we are all, it's just my name on the book jacket, but as I certainly don't have to tell you this, it's like making a movie, but at
Right.
least in a
Right.
movie you have those credits roll at the end. In a book, very often, there are so many people who poured their hearts out.
Oh, everyone, including the copy editors.
Everyone.
The copy editors are amazing
And they'll
and can
never,
save you in
never
publicity, marketing.
credit for that, the person who's designed the jacket, all of that. um,
Yep.
and so it was just a good moment to acknowledge all of their efforts also, and that's my takeaway from that experience.
I want to talk more about your life. You said, I think it was an interview, or maybe it's on your website, that you were a dreamy child, yet you went to business school. Why, and how did you survive that? I cannot see you in business
I,
school.
I mean, the funny part is, I mean, I went to 5 years of business school,
Oh,
graduated with a degree, and have never ever balanced a checkbook in my life. Like, hardly even understand the concept of like how one balances a checkbook. I've never done it ever. Um, I survived business school by claiming it as my own. So what I started doing was I started a drama club,
oh,
and I
great.
started writing plays, and then I started directing plays, and I, got like-minded friends to star in the plays. And that was, I had to rely on the arts in some way to get me through. And the other way, frankly, I survived business school was by never attending business school. Go to, I would go to school every single day, and we had these beautiful marble steps right outside the college. And we would just sit there all day long, gossiping and telling stories and reading and all kinds of stuff. I hung out in the college cafeteria. I mean, so that was one of the ways of surviving business school, was by avoiding it altogether.
I
You know,
love that. I love that. That's so
really
hilarious.
doing plays and doing theater was my ticket out. And here's the irony. The way the system was in those days, there was a choice. Like after the first 2 years, there was a choice to switch and to go to the liberal arts college of my dreams, which is where I always thought while I was in high school I was going to end up. And it was a crisis of confidence at the very last crucial moment. I had a lot of pressure from the adults in my life to not do a liberal arts degree. And I cracked basically and said yes, to going to business school. But I had a choice to switch after 2 years. And I think at that point, the adults in my life would have allowed me to make that switch. But then it became a challenge. Then
Yeah,
it became, instead of letting business school change me, I'm going to change the culture here.
love it.
And so it was like I couldn't quit. I didn't want to quit, which was probably a mistake, but
Whenever you're in the arts, there's always, my mother used to say, writing is not a vocation, it's a hobby. And she said that through my whole career.
right. Well, see,
But that's the way it is. So you were also a prize-winning reporter, and I wanted to know, first, what was that like for you? And second, how did that inform Smita in the book?
so I enjoyed very much my entire career as a daily reporter, and I've often thought that for, an immigrant who went to grad school here and then immediately after that got a job, becoming a reporter 2 years after being in the United States, after being in a new country, was amazing because
Yeah.
it gave me an entryway into American life. I mean, literally into people's homes, in ways that if I had become an accountant or anything else, even an architect, I wouldn't, I couldn't have understood the public education system. I couldn't have understood the inner workings of cops or politics or any of that as easily as I did when I became a reporter. I mean, it was a great privilege because you could literally go into any situation and people would pour their life story out to you.
It's incredible.
And at that time, I had no dreams of becoming a novelist. I mean, I just thought that was something other people did. It never occurred to me that I could do that. But all I was doing all those years was collecting stories. In a
That's
sense,
right.
you know?
So tell us about your journey to become a novelist.
Um, I'll tell you. So, well, two things that I can think of. One is about 10 days before I left to come to the US, a friend of mine, 5 years older than me, put a copy of Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children in my hands and said, read this. And she actually said, read it on the plane, on my way here. Well, I had a book, so of course I cracked it open that same evening, and I was blown away. I mean, I've often said blown away for several reasons. Up to that point, my entire reading and my entire school and college experience had been reading books by British writers and American writers. I was 21 years old. I had never read a novel set in India written by an Indian author. I had
Wow.
never read a novel that had names of characters that were familiar to me. I had never read a novel that had names of streets that I had personally walked down. So I knew Steinbeck's California,
Wow.
far better. This is
Wow.
the result of a post-colonial education. So that alone was eye-opening, right? Holy, you know what? You can tell a story about the world around you. It doesn't have to be Faulkner's Mississippi or Steinbeck's
Right.
California. You can set a story amongst people, amongst places, right? But Midnight's Children was so high art that I didn't think, oh, I can do this. There was none of that. It was just, I am so thankful that
Uh-oh, Thrity froze. Okay, let's see if we can get Thrity unfrozen. Karen, can we do anything? Everybody hang tight. Hang tight. Thrity is frozen. Okay, let me see. All right, so while Thrity is frozen, I want to talk a little bit more about the book, and I want to say that this is a book that's, again, tremendously important to read now because it has so much to do with what is going on in America now, what is going on in Afghanistan, what is going on in so many, many countries where women are subjugated. Don't get me wrong, even though parts of it are difficult to read, it is important to read, and it will make you rethink everything. Let me see if we need to end. Karen, do we need to just end? End. And also, I want to say about the book that every one of Thrity's books is just amazing. Okay, so we're expressing technical difficulties. I'm so sorry. This will be on the YouTube Mighty Blaze station forever, and you can see it there. You can also see it on our Facebook page. Someone says Thrity can leave the interview and come back, but I don't know if she will see my post. I don't know if you can hear me, Thrity, but if you can, leave the internet and come back. And I'm going to post up a little post-it, leave and come back. Hold on. Oh, she did. She did. Okay, so hopefully we'll have her back. So in the meantime, I want to comment on a little bit more about Thrity. You've never met a person more generous. Ron Block says, "Oh, here she is again. Great, great. Oh, I'm so glad you're here."
How long, or if you heard a word of what I said?
No, you sort of froze.
Oh, you
And I
froze.
sang your pros. Oh, I froze. Oh, I was singing your praises. Um, okay, I forgot what we were talking about then.
Uh, you, I gave you a very long-winded answer as to how I made that transition.
Oh, right, how you became a writer. And when was the moment when you believed that you really were a writer?
Oh, geez. I don't think that moment has come yet. Maybe with my next book.
Oh, it's very funny because whenever I hear writers say that, I always know, oh, they're really great writers. It's the writers who say, "Oh yeah, I'm the best. I don't have to worry anymore." Then you know they're not working hard enough.
Right.
So, I just have one more question actually. This is my favorite question of all time. What is on your mind now? What is obsessing you now and why?
Yeah, so I'm sort of very gingerly taking a few steps towards maybe my next project will be some kind of a mystery novel, different genre. But I don't want to do a straight up mystery novel. I'm just letting it simmer. I'm thinking of these characters, and I want to sort of play with that genre and subvert it in some ways. And it's very half baked in my head right now. But
I love that. I love that. I have a friend who's writing, she's a very literary writer, and she's starting to write her first thriller. And I think when you take something that's already been done and you subvert it, it becomes something even more magnificent. It
yeah,
really does.
yeah.
Do we have any audience questions for Thrity? Oh, let's see. Um, if we don't, oh, is there a book or author that inspires you?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't know where to stop, but yeah, anytime. I mean, I have a list of sort of writers that I keep going back to for inspiration, and I would say off the top of my head, probably Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison are the two that really sustain me. But anytime, and I think this is true for most writers, anytime I read a dazzling work, it immediately, I mean, it's one of the reasons why, even though I got a PhD, I never went into literary criticism, because what ended up happening was every single time I read a great book, it didn't make me want to go and analyze that book and write
Yes,
a paper on it. It made me want to immediately run to my computer
right.
and
Exactly.
write my own work. So, um, yeah, I very often turn to books for inspiration. Absolutely.
The biggest compliment I can give a writer is that you made me want to write.
Exactly.
Because you're right. It's sort of like I was an English major in college, and I actually was not good at writing papers because I hated to take something apart and
Right.
talk about the significance and all and how and this stuff. Instead, if I wanted to know how a book was structured, it was just because I wanted to know how to do it. How did they do it to get the story so moving? It was the
That's
story that was alive.
exactly.
Okay, what writing advice would you give to your younger self?
Wow, that's a great question. I think perhaps to have a little bit more self-confidence than I did, and perhaps even to feel worthy of being a writer, to feel like you are not just entitled, but almost have an obligation to tell your own stories. I was, there was nothing in my life growing up that made me think that this is something I was capable of. Frankly, one of the reasons I went into journalism was because it felt like a safe compromise.
Right.
I knew I would be laughed out of town if I said I wanted to be a poet or I wanted to be a writer, when I was 15 years old. And believe me, it was hard enough to even say I want to be a journalist. But
Right.
I knew that I wanted a life in words. And that just seemed like the only way that was possible to do. Um, So I think it like, and this is true, I suppose, at any juncture in your life, in any profession, that just believing in yourself a little bit more is always better than the alternative, I think.
That's right. That's right. And also, I don't know if writers have confidence even if they win the Pulitzer.
Right, right.
I spoke with Elizabeth Strout the day before she won the Pulitzer, and she was talking about how hard everything was. So, I think that's the nature of being a writer. It's like what Mohan says: the things that scare you,
It's true.
you
Yeah.
have to go
And
through it.
insecurity is not always the worst thing in the world.
No, it's not. It's part of the process.
Right.
We have a comment from Kathy Ghosh. She says, I loved Honor. These characters will stay with me for the rest of my life. I agree. They're just totally wonderful.
Thank
We
you.
have time for one last question if anybody has one. What are you reading now?
Oh, I just started Jennifer Egan's new book,
Candyland.
Candy House. Yeah,
Candy,
yeah. And
Candy House, right?
Candy House, right? Yeah, yeah,
Candy House, right. Candyland is the
yeah.
game my son was obsessed with when he was
Right.
little.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
I've really just started. I've only read like a chapter and a half, and I like it very much. I love her writing style. So
she's wonderful, and she's
she
a
is
wonderful person too, which always makes it better.
always.
And so, speaking of wonderful people, thank you all for being here. You can rewatch this on YouTube, as I said, or on our website. You can also continue to offer comments, and a huge thank you to Thrity Umrigar, who is just an amazing person with a heart the size of Jupiter and a talent the size of the galaxy.
How big is
And I'm just so thrilled to see you here, Thrity. And
Thank
next time we'll be in person. So thank
you
you
so
all.
much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are
Much love
so
to you.
welcome. Okay, see you all later.